John MacKay, and this 1 hour presentation is an overview of the extraction class that we're running live, and so I call it Zooming Through the Extraction class. We started the John MacKay Institute of Extraction Technology with the purpose of being able to have more education available as another means of live education besides just the video ones that are typically available. And so this time will be spent looking at the class, the type of things that we do, and an overview of some of the things of extraction today. We started this with just the idea of training and then moving towards a certification. The certification comes about as far as a test that is taken after the class. There's a 1-day class, there's a 3- and 4-day class. There's different classes that are available depending on how deep you want to go into the process. And with that certification, part of it is the test that you would be a written test, as well as your performance during the class as far as understanding what the really process is. So not only being able to answer questions, but watching you through the process and understanding how you're able to do extraction. The 2 classes that are available are typically before a CBD Expo program, but also in 2022 we'll be expanding out that role for more classes and more live training. So this time will be spent with this. The more recent ones are available here, and also being able to go to the Extraction Expo website as well as the CBD Expo website, and these will be available in 2022, so you would be still going to the same websites to find these capabilities. The course goals. Course goal first is understanding the different modes of extraction and separation, as well as the hyphenated modes. We'll speak a little bit about this later, but this is the key part of the course, because concentration is really about extraction and separation. And you're also doing so many things that are ultimately at the same time. And so we will explain those as well as the state of the art of each one of these. They constantly change. There's constant modes of improvement, and we will cover those. The second one is applying the knowledge of concentration to optimize formulation-centric processing, what we call FCP. Not all that clever, but it still works. When you're looking at concentration, it's not the individual part that you're trying to do. It's not one type of extraction covering all. You start off with what you have or desired for a formulation or a compounding mixture, the ingredients that are going to go into a mixture. But then you're also looking from that process, how do you get those ingredients? What are the ingredients that you're needing, either the ones that are active ingredients or inactive ingredients, making sure that they're compatible with each other. And moving through that process, you start to step back through the type of concentration you need. And you step back from the concentration to extraction and separation, all the way back to what you're using for initial ingredients. In this case, a plant. The return on investment that we're really looking for is something less than 10 days. So when you move to a class and you've paid a certain amount of money and you've taken out the travel time and you've taken out the time from work and you've invested in this, what we really want to do is within 10 working days for you to make changes in your business, changes in your processes that pay for the class. And after that, you're reaping the benefits from this. Applying the knowledge of this for formulation-centric processing to the business impact. And that's where you get to the ROI, the BCI, being able to understand how you take a spreadsheet from the information you have from understanding the modes, applying the knowledge, and then from the business impact to get to those 10 days. That's the key for our processing as well as the course goals. As you see, we're got a couple of more this year, one next week in LA and one in the following week. But really, we're going to expand the 2022 locations for live 1-day and 4-day classes. So we'd still be able to use the same process and still be able to talk about how this is expanding into those days. Coffee, one of my favorite extractions. We're always doing an extraction. So looking at this from the National Coffee Association, you have two different coffees where you're trying to have an iced coffee. The first one, you take a small amount of coffee grounds and you add hot water, and you have a certain temperature that they're encouraging to have, 195 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit. You're adding that water, you're allowing it to brew for a certain number of minutes. First of all, few minutes is not a number. You might want to have 6, or you might have 7, might be 3. And so you're looking at each one of those. So few, I believe, is supposed to be, you have 1 minute, you have a couple, you have few, and then you have several. From that point in time, then you're straining the coffee from the filter to remove the grounds. And then you put it in the refrigerator, you let it cool. That is a very different process from the one below. A cold brew coffee, you have coffee grounds, but the grind that they already specify is coarser. It's a different size particle. You're also using a different coffee to water ratio than you did on the top one. You cool it and then you let the coffee steep for at least 12 hours. If you're getting up at 7 in the morning and you're wanting to have a cold brew coffee, you're probably about 12 hours late for making it. You still go through the last two processes, as you notice, and you strain the coffee to remove the grounds. And then from there, you store chilled, keep the concentrate. When you look at the actual chemistry of these two processes, the regular iced coffee, starting from heated coffee, when you do that first part, you have about 1,500 compounds that are coming out of those beans. In the lower process, you only have about 1,000 compounds, and that's why it has a different taste. That's why it has a different process. But if you were to take those two coffees and go all the way to the last part, and you see that and you're saying, oh, I want to have iced coffee, well, you actually have something that is very different as far as the number of compounds that are in there. This is the same process that you're going to see through cannabis, and hemp is cannabis. It just happens to different concentration of the cannabinoids. When you look at that process, are we doing something similar? Are we trying to have a cold, for example, if we were use ethanol? If I use ethanol and I use a different grind, everything that I have on the bottom part is going to have something very different than if I was using room temperature ethanol. And you can see that it's very quick. The same process would be happening in hemp. And we'll learn some of those things through the class. Why is it different? What are the compounds that come out? And what are my choices that I have to make? So we started the Institute with the idea of three major parts. Number one is purposeful innovation of products and processes, staying on top of what the newest technology is, how are the older technologies evolving, what are people using, how are people using it, and really communicating that through the class. It's not the same as it was in 2012, and it's not going to be the same thing as it was in 1012. Again, you're using the processes, and many of the same things are being done from from ancient times, but it turns out that we have more processes available to us. The other one is what I call canology, cannabis analogies. And so when you're moving through that process, how do we move that to be able to know that you know how to do extraction? I call it from the Great Wizard of Oz syndrome. I am the great wizard. And then Toto goes across the curtain and shows not only once but twice because the wizard keeps pulling it back. There's no reason for you to believe that the wizard has anything. You can understand it. Extraction can be understood by the normal American and earthlings on the planet. And so that's the process that we have. And we're going to break that apart and have you understand that you can do this, not only through the process of knowing, okay, I understand this because I want to be in extraction, but also you have a responsibility that if you're having white label products, who is extracting the product that you have? Who is doing that work? And you need to be able to ask the questions because you're still accountable. If you buy something from a white label, you're still accountable for how they did it. The third one is augmenting online and other schools. There are a lot of great schools out there on the videos. There's other schools that are out there for being able to help with extraction, cultivation, marketing. There's a lot of great schools. This is not the only choice you have. And so being able to make sure that you're in a process and you're in a situation that's most amenable for what you're trying to do. And it will be Socratic. It will be a little bit of John Houseman from the paper chase. Ah, Mr. Hart, what is your question? And so as you move through that process, you're able to know that as they had in the paper chase was, I think it was 1983 even, but as you move through that process, you're able to see that every question is available. Every answer, every time you have an answer, there's another question. And so being able to have a smaller group, and so that's what we're focused on. We're not having large groups. You know, for the one-day class, a maximum of 16 people. For the smaller classes, a maximum of 8 people. So being able to really have that classroom participation. Hidden voices and fears. I love this slide only because it really augments many things that are out there and how people feel. I didn't like science in high school. There's no reason for me to believe that this trend is going to change today. And you're right. That probably won't change. I'm only there to be able to bridge that gap to show you that science can be fun. And there's a lot of great chemistry that we're going to learn that you can go back and teach other people in your kitchen about extraction. And you will bore everyone to death on how much fun it is to make coffee and tea. I love everything about chemistry, plant science, physics, and all the applied chemical engineers and process controls. And then having someone on that side of this of the continuum, and with the other side is interesting because you're going to have a melding of those, and you're going to understand. I didn't like science, but hey, these guys are kind of cool. It doesn't, they're not as geeky as I thought they were. And the other ones are going to come to merge. So we're going to be able to have that continuum and work through that process. So both sides are going to be there because we're going to have lots of things for both sides to do. I know this is a stupid question, but I'm usually hearing this within the first hour. After the first hour, it's everyone feels comfortable. Nobody feels attacked. Nobody feels stupid. It's just the question that either you're thinking of or someone else is. And so we stop and we answer those questions. We're making sure that everyone comes along with us. I don't know anything about extraction. Well, that might be one way to take the class, but also that's another process that being able to go through. It turns out you know a lot about extraction. You just didn't know it had a word for it. What is the best extraction? We'll talk about that, but it's really formulation centric. But we're going to answer that question. And because everyone in the class is typically got a different formulation or looking for a different part of the process, we're going to see that working through. How do I get to know more about extraction without doing any work? That's not happening. So that's an easy one. So who needs another extraction class? And whether you're watching the live or watching some recording, the following will save you time and money. Spoiler alert, no one needs another class for extraction of cannabis. That's the small print. That's the fine print. Here, let me make it bigger. No one needs another class for extraction of cannabis. So after the next class, after the next slide, you can log out if that's how you're feeling, or you're saying, I kind of know this, I kind of know where you're going, and I can save you time so you can get back to your to-do list. But I'd encourage you to stay on. Let's see what happens. Maybe I change. So reading the last page of the Who Done It book. I like to say, and this is the slide that, this is where the summary slide is, but I still have other slides and I still got another 45 minutes, and you'll find that, I think engaging. Number one, formulation centric processing. Start with the end in mind. That's what we're moving towards. That's how the extraction class works, because you're moving to the end in mind. And when I talk about best extraction, and we'll see that soon, the extraction that meets your ingredient needs is the best extraction. It's not a solvent base. It's not a solventless base. It's not this. It's not some other formula. It really is, what are you trying to make, or what are you trying to buy for ingredients to be able to have the formulation that you're trying to have? Move back through the process. I also have MacKay's rule of extraction. It's based on the Willie Sutton comment. Willie Sutton was a bank robber. And when he was in jail, he had someone that interviewed him, purportedly, and they said, Willie, why do you rob banks? And his answer was, that's where the money is. And that makes a world of sense. So what we'll talk about is we'll be able to talk about the plant. Where are the cannabinoids? Where are they situated? Where are they concentrated? How do I get to those? What are the value added, non-value added about what I'm trying to make? Good is not a number. You cannot manage what you cannot or will not measure. Simple. So when you look at that and you get up in the morning, you're saying, how do I feel? I feel good. Do you really feel good? How would you know that? You don't know your pressure. You don't know how long you slept. You don't know what your pulse was when you're sleeping. I think some of the new technologies with rings and all these other things that you can monitor, you can actually know what your pulse is in the middle of the night, for God's sakes. You can go back through the entire process and know what those are and know what your blood pressure is and how far you ran or how far you biked or how many steps you took. Those things provide more of a knowledge, but it still doesn't answer the question, how do you feel? And you have the 3 S's of concentration that we will cover. And we cover them through every process to see how do you move to the formulation that you're trying to do economically. Speed, selectivity, and scale, and how they correlate to each other. There's 3 ways to make money, even Willie Sutton. You increase revenue, you decrease cost, and optimize asset utilization. How do you increase the revenue when you're looking at extraction? How do you decrease the cost when you're looking at extraction? How do you optimize utilization? And each one of these we'll talk about. We'll have hands-on teaching and being able to have learning as a facet to help with your memory. Some people learn just by listening. Some people are very disciplined and they will follow the online courses. I would love to say I'm one of them. I'm not one of them, and I guess I'm not the only one. And so that's sort of why we kind of put this together. There are some online capabilities I still have on the web. There's still some writing that to be done for people to read. There's still discussing, but when you're discussing and you have an activity, it binds that memory, and so it's more for the people that fit into that world. There's many examples of resources to build your knowledge base and appropriate for your position. And this is just one of the choices. And so that's how we look at it. Natural products, natural products. So we look at so many things today and we think, cannabis, the first natural product. Not really. I mean, you got Taxol as a chemotherapy. You got antifungals for cyclosporin. You've got aspirin and you got quinine. These are examples of just a small number of examples. You walk through a natural food store and you walk down the aisle of all the essential oils. You walk down the aisle of all of the different fish oil or DHA or any of the other things you have. Those are extracted from a plant or from another source or separated from another source. So even as you look at that process, this is not new, but we are moving towards looking at extraction, and I think some of those things really help out. So speed, scale, selectivity. Selectivity is looking at the different components that I want to have out and the other ones I want to leave behind. You're influencing the order of what you're taking out. The hot coffee versus cold coffee. You're influencing the number of compounds you're taking out by increasing the temperature of the solvent that you're using to be able to extract the compounds that you want. Hops, same idea. Cannabis is just another one. So when you say, I want to use water as a solvent, when you're making coffee, that's an idea. But you also have to know what the other components are. What's your pressure? What's your temperature? Scale. How much coffee do I want to make? Am I making just 1 cup of coffee? Am I making multiple cups of coffee? What is the concentration and how much do I need to be able to get out at the time? Backing that number up to how much do I have to put in to be able to make that much coffee at a certain concentration, or cannabis, or CBD oil, or CBDA, CBGA, some of the different, 3-letter and 4-letter increments. Speed. How much time am I willing to wait to be able to do the selectivity? How much time am I willing to wait to have the scale? So when you look at speed, you can go very fast with hot water versus 12 hours with cold water for coffee. The same thing is true with ethanol and cannabis. You can wait a longer time or a shorter time, but your selectivity is going to be wildly different between the hot room temperature ethanol and the cold temperature ethanol. Each one of these comes into play, and we'll discuss those more. You need to know about this plant. So when you're doing extraction, they're saying, I want to have extraction of hemp. I want to have an extraction of cannabis. Well, there's wildly different amounts of chemovars out there. This is a great paper by Ernest Small. I don't know if it's in open access. It may not be, but but even if it's $35, it's well worth the read. It's a great paper that goes through many of the different phases. It talks about things. It allows you to know about it. And so the evolution and classification. There's other great papers by Dr. Ethan Russo that also go through these capabilities. John Parkinson in Vermont is also another great author to read. Let's look at the best process. I separated into this. B is for botanical materials integrity maintained to assure the concentration of the desired components in a natural form. We're just trying to do the right thing. We're trying to know what we want out of that botanical material. And we have to have it in a form that allows us to do that concentration. So we'll talk about that. It backs up all the way to the particle size. It backs up all the way to the different components that you have. E is for effective concentration. Efficacy is first. Let's not be silly. Efficacy is first. That's what you really want first. Efficiency allows you, once you have the efficacy, to be able to be efficient so that you can have the economics to stay in business within predefined boundaries. And so that's where the science comes in with the business. It's not just the science of extraction, it's how do you merge it with the business. Safety. I used to think safety was just the safety of the customer. That's not the case. It's the safety of all the employees. If you are using different components during the time, what are they wearing? How are they wearing? What are the conditions around them? GMP. You have so many things that are possible and critical to be able to have the best concentration process. Testing with modern technology. Advances in every facet. So no matter where you are in the hardware or the software, being able to have that capability, it's testing with that capability. The food and beverage. So when you're looking at the food and beverage industry and you're trying to find the processes that you have, let's talk about that for a bit. So coffee, hot brew versus cold brew. We've spoken about that. But let's talk about that a little bit more. What kind of other solvents could I use? I could use acetone. I could use ethanol. Each one of these would bring a different process, the same way with tea. When you have a tea bag and you have tea in it, and then you add the hot water, do you just take the tea bag out and you're ready to drink? No. You typically are brewing it in there for a certain amount of time, and then most of the time you're taking a spoon and you're squeezing out the rest of the tea bag out. That is no different than what we're going to cover in cannabis. We're going to look at it at a higher scale. Flavors and fragrances, perfumes and flavors of lemon oil. This is where you're talking about the terpenes. This is where you're talking about the other components, because the cannabinoids do not have a taste. They do not have a smell. So when you're going through the process of what you're smelling the terpenes, you're smelling the flavors, you're smelling a mixture of those terpenes and what smell they came to together. Cleaning. So when you're doing cleaning, you really are doing Clean in place. You need to make sure that you clean. So when you cook something in your kitchen, do you just leave the pot and put it back into the shelf, and then next time it comes out, looks like it's got a little green on it? Well, that's okay. Well, just cook it here. No, you're making sure that everything is clean because you have the material going from time to time. Clothing. Clothing is one thing. So when you're doing an extraction, when you're cleaning your clothing, you are doing an extraction because you're pulling the material off. You're keeping the clothes and you're throwing away the dirt, but you're still doing an extraction. In the case of the cannabis, you're taking the material and you're going back through and looking at other processes in place. How do I do something with a solvent, without a solvent? Okay. So extraction is with a solvent. Separation is without a solvent. Let's look at how those differ. Extraction, I'm using representative things. I've got water. Water can be used as a solvent, but it can also be used in a separation. Isopropyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, ethanol, butane, propane, acetone, heptane, hexane. These come in common products that you can buy locally at the store. They're just not exactly chemically pure. So if I was going back through and I go back to my example of the coffee and I take water, which is my common solvent for that, and then I take ethanol, which is not my common solvent, I can still extract my coffee with ethanol. I will be awake, but I would say that my first couple hours of the day aren't going to be as productive as I wanted them to be. If it's with acetone, you better leave time to be able to go to the emergency room. With a solvent that's a mixture, they're typically sequentially or in a combination sequentially combined. So when you have ethanol, most of the time you don't have pure ethanol. You have an azeotrope. You have a bit of ethanol. You're at 98%. Well, the other, if it's 98%, it's not 100. So it's got to have something else in there. It's typically water. When you bring in the ethanol to the very first stage, from the first 10 millimeters of that, you now don't have pure ethanol. You have ethanol plus all the friends it started with, and it continues up the line until you finish the other side. So you don't have pure ethanol. If you start off at minus 40 and you don't have it always cool, then you have a different type of ethanol. If it's usually it's about 1 degree per minute. So if you started off at 40 and you don't have all the other things around it to keep it at minus 40, then it's minus 39, minus 38, minus 37, minus 36. Those are very different solvent capabilities. That's the case of coffee. You have a filter. We now have instruments that allow us to do this automated. Exciting. So, but you can still do it by adding it and letting it steep. That's called static. When you pour it out, that's called dynamic. So you have static and dynamic on the ways of doing extraction. So those are a critical part. Without solvent, if you grind something, you're not doing an extraction. If you're having different parts of chromatography, even though it's in a mixture, it's a separation, not based on the solvent solubility. Filtration, obviously not a extraction. So whether it's electricity, microwave, ultrasound, you're adding energy into something, but you're not really doing an extraction. You're doing a separation. And you can do multiple separations. You can do multiple things at the same time. So whether it's filtration or other things at the same time, you still have that capability of doing multiple non-extraction, solventless extraction, which is a separation. So the filter, or separating sweets by color or size. Far be it from me, that looks like jelly beans and some M&Ms and some different types of peanut M&Ms. So now you have something sequential. Now you have something with an extraction and a separation. So when you have a separation, you have ultrasound at the same time it's in CO2 or it's still in ethanol. At that time, you now have two things happening at the same time. So is it an extraction and then a separation? Is that extraporation? Or is it a separation with an extraction? So now you have a separation. You combine them and there's no words. But I have made up some words and copyrighted them just because I enjoy them. So again, it's going back through and knowing that you can sign up for it at any time. I would certainly go to the expos, because the reason I go to the expos is because I get to hear other panelists. I get to hear other experts. I get to talk to them over coffee. Yeah, I may have my mask on and I may not touch them, but I can still look at them and assume that they're not ventriloquists. I mean, to me, that's the biggest part with the mask is the ventriloquist business has really gone down. Examples of processes. Let's look at some of them that we talk about in class. Mouthwash at a dentist. So if you're getting a cavity change and you have the mouthwash that he has and you swirl it around in your mouth and you spit it in that bowl and it goes round and round and round and it goes down, is that a separation or is that an extraction? If you're just taking out all the stuff that's in there, the little tiny particles and other things that he's, grilled your teeth with, that's a separation. You're using water or something like water, but you're using that as a separation. You're taking it from one place to another, but you're not extracting. What happens with mouthwash at home? Same thing. Or you're doing water at home, same thing. So it's not the location you're doing it in, it's the act of what you're doing that is still a separation. How about flossing your teeth? That's a pretty easy one. Flossing your teeth at home, there's not as much screaming. For me, when I'm at the dentist, there's a lot more screaming, there's a lot more crying, and that's just me. Toothpick on teeth. Okay. So it's not just what you're doing or how you're doing it. It's the flossing or the toothpick. You're still trying to take particles out in between your teeth that you're not getting with a brush. Brushing your teeth. A brush on teeth. Let's say that I just have a brush on teeth. Well, at that time, I don't have anything different. So I'm either flossing, toothpick, or a brush. They're all the same. But if I have toothpaste with the brush, now I have a different thing. I have something at the same time. I'm actually possibly doing an extraction because I'm solubilizing things that are on my teeth that are in the toothbrush, that are in the toothpaste, and then I'm using the brush at the same time. So I'm doing really an extraporation or a separation. Toothpaste with toothbrush without spitting. Now, first of all, that's gross. Oh, let's not be silly. So if I'm doing that though, but what I'm doing is with spitting, not without spitting. So with spitting, so what I'm doing is now I'm taking the material out from the extraction and now I'm collecting it. Well, hopefully I'm not really collecting, I'm sending it off to waste. So those are the parts that you have. What about picking a flower from a hemp plant from a field? Separation. Drying the flower. Difficult one. Are you doing an extraction or are you doing a separation? Because of the evaporation. You could collect what is being vaporized. Shaking a dried flower and collecting the material that drops off on a piece of paper at Earth's atmosphere. Separation. You're taking the trichomes off. Shaking the flower and collecting material that drops off on screens of different sizes at Earth's atmosphere. Now you're doing a separation with a second phase. So remember we were talking about having multiple separations. Well, here you're just shaking the flower, it's falling off. You're collecting it at different sizes. Those are two different separations. Grinding the flower at Earth's atmosphere. When I'm looking at some of the other parts, let's look at the key compounds of hemp. The amount of the cannabinoids are based on the typical chemovar. The sample preparation, the extraction is a direct impact on your results, and the instrument conditions affect that. So when I'm looking at the chart below with the cannabis plant material, I'm seeing that I have sesquiterpenes, terpenes, cannabinoids, flavonoids, sugars, fats, pigments. Oh, I have all this stuff. There's different parts of this, and you can affect those by the extraction process. You can affect those by how you're doing the extraction, a separation. You can affect those by how you do after the extraction by another separation. You can affect these all the way through the process. And so that's what we look at in great detail. Let's not be silly. So as you're moving through the process, and you see, this is a great article by Eric Lassalle. And when you look at this, it's 2021. We look at all the most recent work so that we can continually have the program be what is most recent. Now, what I want you to look at here is you have all these compounds and different things, which are all the organic chemists are going, oh, I love this. And the other people are going, well, why do they make them? Why do they make them that way? And how do they know they really exist? I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. I can't see them. But when you look at coumarins, those are things that you're mostly wanting to have in your body. At the same time, if it's anticipated that you're doing a blood thinner, but look at the one in between. Look at the glycerol, water, ethanol, toluene, octane, and hexadane. When you look at those are being able to see, as you're moving through a process, you're being able to take out different components based on their solubility like each other. And that's the process that you have to be saying. What am I trying to get? What am I trying to leave behind? What am I trying to bring out? And you can do it at different phases. So even though you can have a separation, you can have an extraction and then do an extraction of the extraction. So somewhere along the way, extraction has become a miracle, and it really can be understood by the common people of Earth. A miracle somehow occurs, but the decisions need to be based on data-driven science versus anecdotal data. You need to selectively dismiss science to fit an opinion. And that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to make it go through. Let's look at the facts and then decide how we want to do the formulation centric process. So scientifically, the concentrates, you may be looking at one thing. I'm sorry, the plant does not care what you're looking at. It knows that it has active ingredients. It knows that it has contaminants. It knows it has mold. It knows it has pesticides and adulterants. Remembering these are subjective words for compounds that we have determined are not good for our health. Contaminants. We've decided those aren't good for our health. There's not good. Pesticides. They could be on the plant. It's still a molecule, and it still can be extracted, but we decided that it's not a good thing. Investment. What's the investment? What's the dollar value? How much does one cost versus another? How do I make those trade-offs? There's a lot of things to think about. So when people are going through that process, they're making a product, and then they're coming to a final product. The better way to think about this is the final product first. What are you trying to make? What are the ingredients? What's the form factor? From there, you go back to the economics of, is that something that's worth making? I don't know. And then the second one is, what are the ingredients that are in there that allow me to have that all the way to the final product? And then from there, going back to the variety. That's the process. You go from what you're trying to make, you start with the end first. I like this one. When I go back through the entire process, I have coffee, cannabis, and clothing. I like alliterations. You know what you want to do with each one, like we've spoken about. We know the solvent that we want to use. We know the co-solvent and other additives. Why don't you do washing with just water? You're adding a co-solvent. The minute you add soap, the minute you add something else, you've added a co-solvent. When you're doing the temperature, it matters. Are you doing a cold wash, hot wash of your clothing? When you're looking at the process post-analysis on clothing and then you want to dry it, how are you drying it? When you have the pressure and you think, well, I don't have pressure with coffee, you do if you're trying to make something that's an espresso. You have to have pressure because the particle size is so small that water won't go through without added pressure. Same thing happens when you're talking about static and dynamic. Are you soaking it and then pushing all the material off? If you make coffee with a coffee bean, and it doesn't matter if it's a coffee bean or how you're doing it, are you starting off with coffee bean and grinding it yourself? Each one of these processes is critically important. So now we go back to the scale and we go back to speed, scale, selectivity. We know more about it now. even through the last 30 minutes. You know more about it. What are we doing? How are we doing it? Cycle time, from the time the plant comes in to the time you have the ingredients or your formulated product. That's your cycle, not the individual ones. You add up the individual ones to that. The cost of each one is important. Scale, from starting from something small, I want to make sure that I'm actually making it and what I think I can do before I decide I'm going to make a whole bunch of these. That has a cost associated with it. Selectivity, influencing the order of elution through the entire process. How do I influence? I can make it go slow in the beginning, change it and go fast. I can change things automatically no matter where the process is. I can keep the ethanol at the exact same temperature. I can change it. I can use butane, propane. I can use different components of that. Each one of these allows me to have some capability. Each one of these comes with a cost. Each part of speed, scale, selectivity comes with a cost. So cleverly enough, you go back through something small. Let's look at just CO2 just because it's an easy one to look at. You can have a very small, you could do 10 milligrams in 10 minutes. Just a small column. Goes to 10,000 PSI. You can then increase that and say, okay, I want to do 15,000 grams, 1,500 grams in 4 hours. Okay, you can just increase it. Or and then you can increase it more and more. As you look at this one out of Spherex and Colorado, if you look at it, you can see the young man sitting there in the middle. That's Dr. Edith. So there you go back through and you can see that that's the size of the equipment to do something larger. But it's no different from the first 10 milligrams that you first did. Same thing can be true of ethanol. So when I'm teaching the course, I'm using different tools along the way that can be used in a lab or can be used in a kitchen so that you see the process in a small scale before the big one. So this is one that, I typically use. It's from Extract Craft. It's a nice little unit. And so I can be able to go through and show ethanol of lavender if I want to, or ethanol of hemp, depending on where I am on a location that allows me to do that. So when you're looking at those processes, you see a typical part. And for me, that's fairly simple. You can do coffee also, by the way. It's just that you don't want to typically drink it. I use another smaller one for CO2 just because I can bring it in, I can carry it in my hands, and I can put a CO2 container next to it. And then I can do lavender, or I can do cocoa butter, or I can do all the other ones. This is a nice little unit that I use from Essential Extraction out of Colorado also. And it's a nice little system that allows me to do something in front of someone at a small scale. And lavender is a great idea because you get to take the lavender oil home. So that's a nice part. So you start off with something small just so I can teach in the class. But as we're moving to the 4-day classes, we're going to move to things that are much larger than that. Same thing when you're mixing and doing a formulation. So how do you do a formulation in a benchtop? Or how do you do a formulation in your kitchen? How do you do a personal cannabis? So each one of the products also brings, I have people that are typically, doing things and that's legally in their kitchen that allows them to make their own products. And these are a couple products that I've been using, the Ardent and also Levo. And so when I'm doing that, I'm able to show, if you take some olive oil and you mix it in, or if you take cocoa butter and you mix it in with something else, it allows you to not only see the process from the beginning to the end and the effect. So if you put different conditions into each one of these, you're going to get a different answer because you've told it to do something different. Well, good is not a number. And through the processes that I've shown before, even through just making coffee itself with hot water or cold water, you will see the difference in the capability with thin layer chromatography. It's going to show you that capability. It's going to show you that process. When you look at, for example, GemmaCert is another one I use. It does spectroscopy. It looks at the THC, CBD, and water. Now it's CBG. And so it allows me to look at something very quickly to say, okay, I have this process in place. I'm looking at this process. And so I can get those answers quickly. And then I use a light lab, which shows the real power of the liquid chromatography. It does 12, cannabinoids in 8 minutes, 8.5 minutes. And so it shows you the power of each one, even though you might use this at a larger scale when you're going forward, but it gives you that laptop thing and mobility. So these are the types of things that you're learning in the course. You're doing extraction, and then you're monitoring, because you remember, good is not a number. So we're going to be able to put these values into a spreadsheet so that you can now see what it means in a larger scale for your business. So where does the S come in the middle? Spend. So now you know how to do an extraction or a separation. Now you know how to scale. Now you know the selectivity. And now you have to take those three numbers. How do you make it into a capital expense? What's your CapEx? What's your OpEx? And then I add more S's because I love alliteration. Safety. Let's not be silly. Safety is really important. Have you got something that's safe that other people can use all the way to the process? Is it simple enough for people to be using, and yet being able to have the automation? Typically, I really like to show this with the great scientific tool called Mousetrap. If you take Mousetrap and you add the individual components in the Mousetrap, you can see that you have a marble that does different things. And when you put it all together, it's automation. And then you capture the mouse. And in this case, you're capturing the product that allows you to make a formulation. So what is the best concentration process? Right back to where we started before. And so when you're looking at that, you're seeing, okay, the technical materials, the integrity maintained to assure the concentration. That's what the course is about. That's what we advocate. Effective concentration with efficacy. We go through efficacy first. That's the part that's the most important. It's efficacy. And then efficiency comes next, and economics comes from that, from predefined boundaries. And in some case, redefined boundaries. Safety and health. We look at how do you make sure that you're doing something safe? What do you wear? So when you're in the class, you're wearing glasses. When you're in the class, you're wearing gloves, and you're 6 feet apart from everyone else. You're maintaining everything that we're doing through today's world. We've got the sprays, and we have the hand cleaning, and we have the masks. We have everything in place to be able to make sure that you're going to be able to stay safe, even in the class. I wouldn't sit too close to me. I have a habit of spitting, so usually we back people up at least 10 feet from there. I'm working on it. Testing with modern equipment and technology. So working through that process, looking at some of the mobile ways of doing this, looking at how you can do it safely, and then looking at how you're going back to it. We talk about why different laboratories have challenges, what you have to do to help with that laboratory. So the outside third-party testing, you marriage with them. You find out how do you work together. So as I do a quiz, if you don't have the ability to measure a compound, does it mean it doesn't exist? Quick answer to that one is no. If you do not know how it affects the metabolism, should you be giving it to someone? Again, that's where we do the efficiency and efficacy, making sure that we totally understand all the components that are in a cannabinoid plant. You wake up in the morning, you feel good. Does that mean that your metabolism is functioning at optimal or even minimum level? You need to be able to know how your equipment's working. Are you making the product that day at the minimum level, at specifications that you're looking for, the high and the low? Where are you on that continuum? Good is not a number. So if you're looking at something and I see you across the room, I don't know the color of your eyes. Until you move closer, I don't know the color of your eyes. And so when you have, have, tea-free, do you have tea-free or do you have non-detect? Because you can't see the color of your eyes doesn't mean that you don't have a color of your eyes. I just can't see it within that specification. So we talk about that and how to optimize that. Peer-reviewed literature. I always bring books and books of peer-reviewed literature, and I bring my favorite books and favorite extraction books and favorite articles and favorite authors, and allow you to just go through them all and spray your hands, and making sure that it's not exactly the literature from 1420, but it is being able to look at that process. So that's what we have as far as the extraction and where the different components are. We also have it this year, for a couple more sessions, and then 2022 we're expanding that. And when we're looking at that entire process, we're not really looking for everything that we have, but as we move through the process and have questions, we're making it small so that we have a true interaction with each other to be able to make sure that all your questions are answered, or all the things that you're trying to do. Maybe you have other questions and maybe looking at other papers. And I thank you for this time, and appreciate your staying with me, those who did, and those who are working on other stuff. I guess you'll catch a recorded version somewhere along the way.